Blood stained the Loro Piana Vicuña wool, but that wasn't what made the ruthless underboss freeze. It was the repair. Hidden inside the lining was a complex, interlocking daisy stitch, a secret technique his murdered mother invented 30 years ago. And the terrified, heavy-set seamstress trembling before him had just replicated it perfectly. Rain pounded against the grimy front window of Sullivan's alterations on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx. Beatrice Sullivan leaned heavily over her cutting table, the wooden surface groaning slightly under her weight. She was a fat woman, and she knew it. At a size 24, she carried her weight with a quiet, grounded dignity. Her broad shoulders and thick arms were built for the physical labor of wrestling heavy winter coats and stiff wedding gowns under the needle of her industrial Singer 20U professional sewing machine. While the fashion world prized delicate, waif-like frames, Beatrice's heavy-set body gave her the leverage needed to manipulate thick leathers and stubborn canvases that other tailors in New York refused to touch. Late-night hours were her sanctuary, wedged between the aromatic exhaust of Mike's Deli and a boarded-up shoe repair shop. Beatrice's storefront was virtually invisible, much like Beatrice herself. People rarely looked past her double chin or the wide expanse of her hips hidden beneath a faded canvas apron. They just saw a fat seamstress. But in her hands, a simple spool of Gutermann silk thread became a tool of pure artistry. Tonight, the bell above the door shattered the rhythmic hum of the Bronx street. Two men stepped into the fluorescent light of the shop. They did not look like the usual neighborhood clientele. The first man was built like a cinder block, his nose flattened from years of poorly healed breaks. The second man, slightly leaner but radiating a terrifying, coiled energy, carried a bundle of dark fabric wrapped in a black plastic garment bag. "You Beatrice?" the leaner man asked, his voice a gravelly rasp that barely carried over the sound of the rain. Beatrice wiped her plump, chalk-dusted hands on her apron and nodded, her heart hammering against her ample chest. "I am. We're technically closed, but if you need a pickup—" "We need a fix," the man interrupted, tossing the plastic-wrapped bundle onto her pristine cutting table. The heavy thud made Beatrice flinch. "And we need it by midnight. No cops, no questions. You do this right, you get $5,000. You mess it up, or you talk, and this shop burns down with you in it." Before Beatrice could process the threat, the two men turned and walked back out into the downpour, climbing into a sleek, black Lincoln Navigator, idling at the curb. Trembling, Beatrice approached the table. Her thick fingers unzipped the garment bag. Inside lay a men's suit jacket. Even in her panicked state, her tailor's brain instantly categorized the garment. It was custom, pure Loro Piana Vicuña wool blend, an incredibly rare and expensive fabric that cost thousands of dollars per yard. It was charcoal gray, perfectly cut, and completely ruined at the left shoulder. A ragged tear ripped through the shoulder seam, exposing the canvas interfacing and the silk lining beneath. But it wasn't just torn. The wool was heavily saturated with a sticky, dark, rust-colored substance. Blood. A lot of it. Bile rose in Beatrice's throat, but survival instinct took over. She had to clean the fabric before the blood set into the vicuña fibers permanently, and she had to repair the tear so seamlessly that a dangerous man would consider it flawless. She waddled quickly to her back sink, her heavy thighs brushing together beneath her skirt, and grabbed her industrial hydrogen peroxide and cold water misters. For the next 2 hours, Beatrice worked in a manic trance. Her large body moved with surprising practiced grace around the small shop. She successfully lifted the bloodstain without destroying the delicate nap of the wool. But the real challenge was the structural repair. The bullet or knife, she didn't want to know which, had shredded the internal shoulder pad and the bespoke silk lining. Sitting in her reinforced steel chair, Beatrice carefully unpicked the remaining intact stitches of the lining to get a better angle. As the silk fell open, she gasped. Hidden deep inside the arm sky, stitched directly into the canvas structure where no one would ever see it, was a signature. It wasn't a monogram or a label. It was a line of hand stitching forming a complex, interlocking pattern that looked like a chain of tiny daisies. Beatrice's breath hitched, her soft face paling. She knew this stitch. 15 years ago, when Beatrice was a lonely, overweight teenager working the counter at a Brooklyn dry cleaner, an elegant, older Italian woman named Caterina had taken pity on her. Caterina used to sit in the back room, altering mobsters' suits for extra cash. Caterina had seen Beatrice crying over her weight and the cruel jokes of the neighborhood boys. The older woman had dried Beatrice's tears, handed her a needle, and taught her how to sew, giving the girl a purpose. Caterina had taught her the interlocking daisy stitch, whispering, "This is our secret, mia dolce," a signature for women who are forced to hide in the shadows. Caterina had vanished a year later. Rumor was she had been killed in a Mafia purge. Staring at the bloody jacket, Beatrice's thick fingers traced the daisies. This was Caterina's work, which meant the man who wore this jacket was connected to the woman who had saved Beatrice's life. Driven by a sudden, fierce loyalty to her late mentor, Beatrice threaded a needle with heavy-duty silk. She patched the canvas, repaired the shoulder pad, and meticulously closed the silk lining. And right along the interior seam, her chubby, skilled fingers perfectly replicated the interlocking daisy stitch, anchoring the repair with Caterina's secret signature. She pressed the wool one last time, the heavy iron sending up a cloud of steam that curled around her flushed, round face. It was 11:55 p.m. The jacket looked brand new. Midnight struck with the distant tolling of a church bell. The Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting violently through the dark, rain-swept street. Beatrice stood behind her counter, her large frame suddenly feeling painfully vulnerable. She smoothed her hands over the wide expanse of her stomach, trying to steady her breathing. The bell chimed. This time, the two thugs stayed outside, standing guard in the rain. Only one man walked through the door. He was breathtakingly terrifying. Standing at least 6'3", he possessed the lean, predatory muscle of a hunting hound. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, exposing a faint dusting of dark chest hair and a heavy gold chain. His cheekbones were sharp, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and his dark eyes were as cold and dead as shattered obsidian. The faint, expensive scent of Tom Ford tobacco vanille cologne wafted from him, failing to entirely mask the metallic tang of gunpowder. This was Lorenzo Moretti, the newly minted boss of the Moretti crime family, and it was his blood Beatrice had washed out of the wool. Lorenzo didn't look at Beatrice's face. His eyes briefly swept over her heavy, round figure with total indifference, dismissing her instantly as non-threatening. He walked straight to the cutting table where the charcoal Loro Piana jacket hung on a heavy wooden valet stand. "Is it done?" Lorenzo asked, his voice a low, terrifying baritone that seemed to vibrate in Beatrice's chest. Yes, sir," Beatrice stammered, her voice squeaking. She hated how timid she sounded, how small she felt inside her large body when faced with a man of his dangerous caliber. "The blood is entirely lifted. The fibers are undamaged. I had to reconstruct the left shoulder canvas and completely re-anchor the silk lining, but the exterior seam is blind. You won't be able to tell it was ever compromised." Lorenzo ignored her explanation. He grabbed the jacket with a ruthless efficiency. He ran his long, calloused fingers over the exterior wool of the left shoulder. He pulled the fabric taut, testing the strength of the invisible thread. Finding no flaw, a faint look of mild surprise crossed his aristocratic features. Then he turned the jacket inside out to inspect the lining. Beatrice held her breath, her fleshy hands gripping the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. Lorenzo's thumb dragged along the interior arm side where the silk met the canvas. Suddenly, his thumb stopped. He froze. Every muscle in his massive back tensed beneath his white shirt. The silence in the tailor shop became suffocating. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to scream. Slowly, agonizingly, Lorenzo turned his head to look at Beatrice. The cold indifference in his dark eyes was gone, replaced by a violent, blazing shock. He stepped toward the counter, closing the distance between them in 2 massive strides. "Where did you learn this?" Lorenzo demanded, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. He thrust the inside of the jacket toward her face, his finger pointing directly at the interlocking daisy stitch she had painstakingly recreated. I just thought it belonged there," Beatrice lied, her entire massive body shaking. "It was on the original seam, so I copied it to maintain the integrity of the—" "Do not lie to me!" Lorenzo roared, slamming his fist onto the wooden counter with such explosive force that a jar of buttons shattered onto the floor. Beatrice let out a terrified sob, stumbling backward. Her heavy hips slammed into the pressing machine, but she barely felt the bruise forming. Lorenzo vaulted over to the counter with terrifying agility. Before Beatrice could scream, he was backing her against the wall. He didn't strike her, but he caged her in, his large hands planting flat against the brick on either side of her head. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. Up close, the violence in his eyes was eclipsed by an agonizing, raw desperation. "That stitch," Lorenzo gritted out, his chest heaving, "is not a standard tailor's mark. It was invented by my mother. She put it in every garment she made for me to keep me safe. She was murdered 15 years ago, and I have the only 3 coats she ever made with that mark. No one in the world knows how to do it. So I will ask you one more time, and if you lie to me, your weight won't stop me from throwing you through that front window. Who taught you that stitch?" Tears spilled over Beatrice's round cheeks. "Katerina," she cried out, shrinking against the wall. Her name was Katerina. She worked at the Golden Hanger dry cleaners in Brooklyn 15 years ago. She taught it to me. She was kind to me when everyone else called me a fat pig. She said it was our secret. Lorenzo stared at her, the breath knocked out of him. His arms slowly dropped to his sides. "Brooklyn," he whispered, staring at Beatrice as if really seeing her for the first time. Not as a fat seamstress, but as a ghost from his past. She was hiding in Brooklyn. He took a step back, running a hand over his face. He looked at the jacket, then back to the terrified, plus-size woman cowering against his wall. "Did she give you anything else?" Lorenzo asked, his tone suddenly urgent. "Before she disappeared, did she give you a package, a letter, anything?" Beatrice sniffled, wiping her wet face with the back of her thick forearm. She gave me a heavy winter coat. She made it for me. She said I needed the extra padding to stay warm." Lorenzo's eyes widened. "Where is that coat?" "In my closet, upstairs." Lorenzo pulled a matte black Glock 19 from the waistband of his trousers. Beatrice screamed. "Shut up," Lorenzo ordered, grabbing her thick upper arm. His grip was entirely different now. It was a protective vice. My enemies shot me tonight because they are looking for the ledger my mother stole before she died. If you have that coat, you have the ledger. And if they track my blood to this shop, they will skin you alive to get it. Pack a bag right now, Beatrice. You belong to the Moretti family now." The narrow staircase leading up to Beatrice's apartment smelled of stale garlic and old floor wax. Lorenzo took the steps 2 at a time, his imposing frame crowding the confined space, while Beatrice hurried behind him, her heavy breaths echoing in the stairwell. Her thick thighs burned with the sudden exertion, the wet fabric of her skirt clinging uncomfortably to her legs. She was terrified, her mind spinning wildly out of control. The Moretti family. A missing ledger. Murder. She pushed open the peeling wooden door to her apartment. It was a modest, impeccably clean, 1-bedroom space filled with dress forms, bolts of discount muslin, and framed vintage Vogue covers. "Where is the closet?" Lorenzo barked, his Glock 19 sweeping the dark corners of the room. "In the bedroom," Beatrice panted, pointing a trembling, plump finger toward a closed door. Lorenzo shoved the door open, ignoring the frilly pink duvet on her queen-sized bed, and ripped open the sliding closet doors. "Show me." Beatrice waddled forward, her heart hammering against her ample chest. She reached into the very back of the cramped closet, her thick arms pushing aside polyester blends and cotton shifts until her hands met the familiar, rough texture of heavy wool. She pulled it out, a massive forest green overcoat, custom-tailored for her size 24 frame. "Katerina made this for me my second winter, working at the dry cleaners," Beatrice explained, her voice cracking as she laid the massive coat onto the bed. She said it was lined with extra batting to keep the New York wind out. I never really wore it. I run hot, and it was so incredibly heavy. Lorenzo didn't say a word. He holstered his weapon, pulled a sleek, silver Benchmade tactical knife from his pocket, and flicked his wrist. The blade locked into place with a sinister click. "Wait!" Beatrice gasped, her tailor's heart aching as he raised the blade. "Don't destroy the bias. I can open the seam." She scrambled to her nightstand, pulling a sharp steel seam ripper from her sewing kit. Pushing Lorenzo's massive muscular arm aside with surprising firmness, Beatrice leaned over the coat. Her chubby, nimble fingers worked with lightning speed, slicing through the heavy-duty nylon thread binding the bottom hem. As the dark green silk lining fell open, a thick layer of synthetic quilt batting was exposed. But there, nestled right between the shoulder blades, stitched securely into a waterproof pouch, was a rectangular bulge. Lorenzo's breath hitched. He reached in and ripped the pouch from the batting. Inside was a small black moleskin notebook, its pages filled with Katerina Moretti's elegant, looping handwriting. It was the ledger, the master record of 30 years of offshore accounts, corrupt politicians, and most importantly, the identities of the traitors who had sold his mother out to the rival Costa family. Before Lorenzo could open it, the deafening sound of shattering glass erupted from the shop below. The floorboards vibrated. Shouts in rough Italian drifted up the air vents. The Costa family soldiers had found the blood trail. "We have less than 30 seconds, Lorenzo said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He shoved the moleskin into the inside pocket of his freshly repaired Loro Piana jacket. He grabbed Beatrice by her thick upper arm. "Fire escape! Now!" I can't," Beatrice stammered, paralyzed by fear and a sudden, crushing awareness of her own body. "Lorenzo, I'm over 300 pounds. That iron fire escape has been rusted since 1998. It won't hold me, and I can't run." Lorenzo spun her around, his hands gripping her broad shoulders. His dark eyes bore into hers, fierce and completely devoid of judgment. "Listen to me, Beatrice. You are a survivor. You have my mother's hands, and you have her coat. I do not leave what belongs to my family behind. You are going to climb out that window, and if the iron breaks, I will catch you. Do you understand?" Tears blurred her vision, but she nodded. Lorenzo shattered the bedroom window with the butt of his gun, kicking the wooden frame out to make room for her wider frame. Rain whipped into the bedroom, instantly soaking them. Beatrice climbed out first, her heavy body awkward but determined. The rusted iron groaned agonizingly under her weight, but it held. She began the treacherous descent into the dark, rain-flooded alleyway, her thick fingers slipping on the slick metal rungs. Footsteps thundered up the interior stairs. The bedroom door was kicked off its hinges. Gunfire erupted. Bullets chewed through the brick wall inches from Beatrice's head. She screamed, her foot slipping off the wet rung. She plummeted the last 10 feet toward the pavement, squeezing her eyes shut. But she didn't hit the concrete. Lorenzo, having vaulted over the railing, hit the ground first and caught her. He grunted as her massive weight crashed into him, but his powerful legs absorbed the shock. He didn't drop her. Instead, he kept his arm securely around her thick waist, hauling her behind a rusted dumpster, just as the alley lit up with return fire from Lorenzo's waiting crew, who had finally circled the block. "Get her in the car," Lorenzo roared to his driver, pushing Beatrice toward a heavily armored Cadillac Escalade that had just smashed through the alley entrance. Beatrice scrambled into the back seat, her chest heaving, her wet clothes plastered to her heavy curves. Lorenzo dove in right behind her, slamming the reinforced steel door as bullets pinged harmlessly off the bulletproof glass. As the Escalade peeled out into the Bronx night, leaving Sullivan's alterations behind forever, Beatrice slumped against the leather seats. She looked over at the terrifying Mafia boss. His white shirt was soaked in rain and slowly blooming with a fresh, terrifying stain of bright crimson. The jump had torn his stitches. The ride to Alpine, New Jersey, was a blur of flashing streetlights and suffocating tension. The armored Escalade tore through the iron gates of a sprawling, heavily wooded estate just as Lorenzo slipped into unconsciousness, his massive head lolling against Beatrice's plump shoulder. Beatrice hadn't stopped pressing her thick hands against his chest, trying to stem the bleeding. Inside the lavish, marble-floored safe house, Lorenzo's men carried him to a massive leather sofa in the den. The stark, brilliant light of the crystal chandelier illuminated the horrific reality of his injury. "Where is the doctor?" Beatrice yelled, her usually soft voice cracking like a whip across the luxurious room. "He's stuck in a blockade on the George Washington Bridge," Leo, Lorenzo's lieutenant, snapped, his face pale. "He's at least an hour out. Lorenzo's losing too much blood. The bullet grazed his rib earlier, but the jump tore the artery." Beatrice looked at the bleeding boss, then at her own blood-soaked, pudgy hands. She thought of Katerina. Katerina had saved her. Now she had to save Katerina's son. "Get me a first aid kit, boiling water, and a bottle of high-proof vodka," Beatrice ordered, her tone brooking no argument. "And get me a sewing needle and the strongest silk thread you can find in this mansion. Now!" The men scrambled. Within minutes, Beatrice was kneeling beside the leather sofa. She stripped away Lorenzo's ruined shirt, exposing his heavily muscled, tattooed chest. The laceration was deep, the flesh jagged. Drawing a deep breath, Beatrice sterilized her hands with the vodka, then poured the rest directly into his wound. Lorenzo groaned in his unconscious state, his back arching off the leather. "Hold him down," she commanded Leo. Threading the needle with a steady hand, Beatrice went to work. She wasn't suturing a fine vicuña suit. She was repairing human flesh. But the mechanics were the same. Tension, spacing, structural integrity. Her large body leaned over him, her soft, fleshy stomach pressing against the edge of the sofa to give her leverage. She used a precise, locking mattress stitch, her thick fingers moving with the grace of a concert pianist. By the time the mob doctor finally burst through the front doors, Beatrice was tying off the final knot, wiping the excess blood away with a clean towel. The doctor inspected her work, his eyes widening. This is flawless. I couldn't have closed the artery better myself. Beatrice collapsed backward onto the plush carpet, her heavy body entirely spent. She pulled her knees to her chest, burying her face in her arms. Hours later, the den was quiet. The fire crackled in the massive stone hearth. Beatrice sat in a wing-back chair, bundled in a plush cashmere blanket that barely wrapped all the way around her wide hips. "You have a habit of fixing things that are broken." Beatrice's head snapped up. Lorenzo was awake, propped up against the pillows on the sofa. His chest was heavily bandaged, his face pale, but his dark eyes burned with an intense, mesmerizing heat as they locked onto her. "I'm a seamstress," she whispered, her cheeks flushing hot. "It's what I do." Lorenzo slowly pushed himself up. He reached into his trouser pocket and pulled out the black moleskin ledger. "My mother didn't just leave me a list of enemies, Beatrice. There is a letter folded inside the front cover. It was written to me. She told me about the lonely, talented girl with a heart of gold she had taken under her wing. She told me that if I ever found the coat, I was to protect the woman wearing it with my life." Beatrice's breath caught. "Katerina wrote about me?" "She did," Lorenzo murmured, his gaze dropping to the soft curves of her face, the fullness of her lips, and the gentle, maternal slope of her shoulders. "I have spent 15 years surrounded by starving, ruthless people. Women who are made of sharp angles and hidden daggers. Men who would sell my soul for $1. And then I walk into a dusty shop in the Bronx, and I find a woman who works in the shadows, who carries the weight of the world with dignity, and who literally bled to stitch me back together." He slowly extended his large, calloused hand toward her. "Come here, Beatrice." Trembling, Beatrice stood up. She felt huge, clumsy, and entirely out of place in this multi-million-dollar mansion. But as she walked towards him, Lorenzo didn't look at her with disgust or pity. He looked at her with pure, possessive reverence. She placed her plump hand in his. His fingers curled around hers, warm and impossibly strong, pulling her gently down to sit on the edge of the sofa beside him. "The Costa family knows you helped me," Lorenzo said, his thumb tracing the soft, dimpled flesh of her knuckles. "Your shop is gone. Your old life is gone. But you are not alone. My mother chose you to carry her legacy. But I am choosing you to stand by my side. You will never have to hide in the shadows again." Beatrice looked into the eyes of the deadliest man in New York, a man who had just claimed her as his own. She felt the heavy beat of his heart beneath the fresh stitches she had sewn. For the first time in her life, her size, her weight, and her scars didn't feel like a burden. They felt like armor. "I don't know how to be a mafia boss's woman," Beatrice whispered honestly. Lorenzo's lips curved into a dangerous, breathtaking smile. He pulled her closer, pressing a fierce, branding kiss to the soft pulse point of her thick wrist. "You don't have to be. You just have to be Beatrice. I'll take care of the rest." If you loved Beatrice and Lorenzo's heart-pounding journey from a Bronx tailor shop to an alpine mansion. Don't leave just yet. Hit that like button to show your support for a fierce, plus-size heroine who saved the day with a needle and thread. Share this gripping romance drama with your friends who love mafia twists, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, real-life inspired stories.